Hey everybody, this is Paul in my garage. Haven't done one of these videos in quite a while. It's Saturday night, so it's time for me to shoot a video while you're all out drinking, having fun, right? So normally I would do this at about 2 in the morning, but stepping completely out of character, I'm doing this at about 8:30 p.m. You guys probably aren't even very drunk yet. Kid went to bed early. Wife's settled into her favorite chair with a nice big glass of wine, so I snuck out here to shoot a video. And earlier today I posted a video on Facebook of me trying to hurt myself by taunting this spring to jump out of the machine and knock my teeth out. And it didn't, it stayed put, but it certainly tried as I was running a dynamic test, and I ran through the natural frequency, or excited the spring at its natural resonant frequency, and that's essentially what this video is about. What happens when you excite things at their natural resonant frequency. And when I say things, I mean anything that is either not damp or very lightly damp. In this case, the steel spring has almost zero damping, and this really applies to anything on any piece of machinery, because everything has a natural resonant frequency. Again, unless it's very heavily damped, like a piece of clay, for instance. Bad things can happen. This applies to any spring, whether it be a valve spring or even your crankshaft, for that matter. Your crankshaft has its own natural resonant frequency, both in bending and torsionally. And essentially what this video about is trying to give you a visual of just how fucking ugly things get when you excite a spring at its natural resonant frequency. So I'm going to stop yakking. I'm going to restart the video in slow motion. I'm going to click go on the machine. I'm going to scurry over to the other side of the shop to avoid the mayhem should this thing decide to come loose. Hopefully it doesn't break my phone. And then I'll start the video back up, try to explain a little bit about what's going on, and hopefully everyone enjoys it. If not, just remember, it was free. And go. Okay, I'm still alive. Time for the next part of the video. Well, that spring used to be centered nicely. Look at what happened here. Woo! Luckily the stud there in the bottom, you can't see that very well, sorry. Oh wait, yeah you can. Kept it from coming out at that direction, and the cup here at the top kept it from coming out the other direction, but as you can see, wasn't too happy. Okay, so there's something I'd like to point out, and that is that at the peak of the resonance, when the spring was bouncing around the most, the activity there was actually quite violent. And after this clip, I'm going to show you a real-time video of that so you can see just how violent it is. But one of the best ways to illustrate that point is if you rewind a bit, you'll notice that the camera was shaking. It was wobbling up and down a little bit. That wasn't me. It was on a tripod sitting right there. Now, the important thing to keep in mind is that this machine, from memory, weighs about 900 pounds. I think that's right. I've probably got that wrong. Let's just say that it's several hundred pounds to be sure. And it is bolted down to a concrete floor, and that's 6 inches of concrete. So it's not even a wimpy concrete floor. It's the real deal. And in spite of that, it somehow got the camera to shake sitting there on that tripod. So figure that one out. Anyway, let's see. On to a real-time version of that so you can see just how ridiculously violent it is. Oh, shit. Okay, here we go again. This time I'm going to feed a square wave into the spring. The platform is sitting at 0 right now. It's going to come up to 1/10 of an inch, and then it's going to fire it up to 2 inches as abruptly as it can. And it's worth pointing out that there's no such thing as a square wave in the real world, because that would imply infinite acceleration. We can't go from one position to another in an infinitely small amount of time. That's some Star Trek shit. And so in reality, every square wave that we see, if we zoom in, we'll see that it has some amount of slope on both the rising and the falling edge. So again, it's not a true square wave. I say that only to make the point that it doesn't really exist, but I am going to feed energy into this spring as abruptly as I possibly can within the limitations of the machine. And of course, I'm going to run to safety on the other side of the shop before I do that. So here goes. And apparently I didn't get the acceleration limit set correctly on the machine because it faulted, so I better go and check that file. Looks like it went out of range, so instead of bringing it up 2 inches and holding, it brought it up 2 inches, or at least in the process of attempting to do that, it exceeded one of its built-in limits. I don't know if it was velocity or acceleration, but better go tune the drive file a little bit, and we'll try again. But for now, at least you can see the amount of oscillation that existed with what it did do, which was a simple impulse input. So let me go tweak the file, and I'll try this again. All right, so after the last attempt, after telling you that a square wave doesn't exist in reality because that would imply infinite acceleration, I wrote a drive file that required, well, not infinite acceleration, but much more than the machine was intended for, and it errored out instead of settling into the 2-inch platform position as it was supposed to. So I fixed it, reduced the rate of acceleration, and here we go again. Click the button, run to safety, and hope it works out this time. Otherwise, it could just be a long video full of fuck-ups and takeouts. Hang on. Yeah, apparently this is just a video full of takeouts. I'll just keep fucking around until I get it right. How's that? Alright, well, that was another fail, as you can see by the fact that it did the 2-inch step and then immediately dropped back down to 0. And of course, I know it was a failure because I have this error message here that says, "Error, an axis fault occurred." Of course, I'd like to ask the question, which fucking one? So I don't waste all night dicking with this drive file trying to figure out what the fuck is wrong. But, well, I think I'm just too lazy to spend all night fucking around, so I'll end the video here. Alright, I'm back. So like any dog with a bone, I can't seem to walk away from this. I want to get this video shot. And I included the last clip because I realized that if you guys were looking for something PC, you wouldn't be here. You'd probably be watching CNN. So there you go. Videos of bouncing springs and temper tantrums and outtakes, and I'm just going to keep going until I get this fucker right. So, I put the spring back in the damper, hoping the damper will slow it down enough to limit the maximum velocity or acceleration or whatever the fuck it is that's pissing off the machine or the software. And we'll try this and see how it goes. Who knows? We'll keep this up all night. It might be a really long video. So I'll click the run button, run across the shop again to save myself, and we'll see what happens. All right, so now for the part I didn't tell you. This is a different spring. This is the front spring. It's considerably shorter. I don't know what its resonant frequency is, so I may have to shoot the first parts of the video all over again with this spring, but hopefully I got a good shot here. And stepping back a bit, the reason I use this one is that the rear is so much longer that by the time I get it on the damper, it won't fit in the machine because well, I don't have enough mast length to get it done and get the adapters in there to hang out of the damper. So there we go. On to the next. Okay, I'm back. Why? Well, because the last file didn't save, because the machine had another fault, which was actually pretty easy to solve. Got the cover off the machine, got that figured out. Unrelated to the prior fault. I know that because I put everything back together the way it was. Got another fault. Anyway, I'm going to get this thing finished if it turns into version 2.0 of the Winnebago Man. So, I wanted to get this right. I used the spring compressor to take the long rear spring, the one that was too long to fit on this short damper, compressed it enough to fit on the short damper, which I used to keep the machine from faulting out. And one way or another, I'm going to shoot this motherfucking video. So, once again, long spring, sort of fucking square wave input. I'm going to click go. I'm going to run and hide in case something explodes. Wish me luck. Success. Well, the adapter fell out because I left it in. It's okay, nothing was actually damaged. Awesome. Finally got a good shot of that. All right, infidels, I'm back. And I'm cheery now because not only was the test successful in terms of hanging on to the spring as it was supposed to, meaning stepping up to 2 inches and holding there so that we could view the oscillation, but the file saved because the system didn't fault. I got that fixed. And what you see here in the green trace, I hope you can see it. Actually, as I look at the screen, I realize you can't. Give me a moment to change that color to make it stand out more. We'll make it black. There we go. Now you can see it clearly. So the system starts at 0, it ramps up to 1/10 of an inch, and then bang, as quickly as it can. In fact, it reached a peak velocity of about 140 inches per second. It steps up to 2 inches. It holds it there for 2 seconds, and then it ramps back down, and that's the end of the test. Obviously, that's not the part that's interesting, but I wanted to at least go over exactly what it is that we did. So getting rid of that and looking at the force, it gets very interesting. Now, again, there's nothing much going on here. At the beginning, we see a big spike in force that reaches about 1,900 pounds force. That's due to the damper. You know, we're moving the damper at 100 and some inches per second. It's not surprising that it's going to build a lot of force. But by the time we get here, where the cursor is, the damper velocity is now 0. It's holding steady at 2 inches. And you can see the effects of the spring oscillating because the force is bouncing up and down as the spring is doing its thing. And I have to tell you, this is actually the first time I've paid close attention to this. It's the first time I've fed a square wave into a spring, and I feel kind of like a dipshit for not having done this before. So I'm experiencing this for the first time, just as you probably are. Here's what's so interesting about this. The average force throughout the range is about 600 pounds, which is going to be equivalent to the rate of the spring times the displacement of the spring plus whatever gas force is in the damper. You know, whatever the case may be, it should hold steady at whatever that is. But in fact, it's oscillating up and down quite a bit as the spring is bouncing. And getting to the point, here's what's critical. The force here is about 900 pounds, right? And of course, I said the average was about 600. It drops all the way down to 200. And so we have an oscillation here that starts with a total differential, meaning from the highest force to the lowest force during the oscillation, of 700 fucking pounds. And this oscillation is occurring at 38 hertz. I haven't really thought much yet about how the tire is going to deal with that, how much the tire might filter it out, because again, the tire being a series spring acts as a classic first order low pass filter. If you don't understand that, that's fine. Just think about your car and the way it rides with low tire pressure as opposed to high tire pressure. It filters out a lot of the high frequency stuff. But an oscillation of 700 fucking pounds is a really, really, really big deal, and it dissipates fairly quickly, especially initially. And I think the reason for that is that the spring tends to want to rotate as it's compressed. It's sitting on a plastic bushing of some type. I don't know if it's Delrin or whatever, but there's certainly some movement there that's going to give it some damping, and that would explain why once the forces die down a little bit, it tapers off more gradually. Also, I noticed when I looked at the first, well, I'll just show it again. When we look at displacement, you can see a little bit of a sawtooth shape there. The actuator is trying to hang on to this thing at a given position with a 700 pound oscillation. So the position of the ram is oscillating a little bit as well. It only amounts to about 0.006 of an inch, but that's enough. That alone is enough to offer some damping to get these forces to dissipate fairly quickly. And let me get that back out of the way. But the interesting thing to note is that after 2 seconds, we have an oscillation that's still equivalent to, probably at least 150, maybe 175 pounds. That's huge, 175 pounds oscillating there at 38 hertz. Now, what we see here is that this is the actuator going back to the home position. That takes 1 second. The oscillation is barely dissipating during that period of time. Now it gets back down here at rest, and still at the very end of this, let's see, we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, almost 6 seconds later, we have an oscillation that's still in the neighborhood of 75 to 80 pounds. Now all of that is being shuttled back and forth between the chassis and the hub, and then of course the tires between that and the ground. And again, I'm seeing this the first time for myself. I haven't had a chance to really process it and think about what it might be worth, but I don't think I have to tell you that that's a fucking mess. 75 pounds is big enough. 10 times that, or almost 10 times that, 700 pounds at the beginning is pretty extreme. And the other thing I'll tell you is that the rate of energy input to this thing is probably not that far off for an off-road vehicle that's hitting the ground at a pretty high velocity. So that's something I can check later after we get some shock pots on this Yamaha. But again, there it is. It's all really ugly. I don't completely understand it, and that's quite all right, because the intent of these videos is not to give you an answer to a specific question. The idea is more to present a concept, maybe try to explain it in a manner that makes sense, although there's not much explanation to go along with this one. And I have one more section to show you from the frequency sweep, and I'll bring that up in a moment, show you what we got there. Be right back. All right, so now we're looking at the data from the first test, the test with the spring by itself, where it tried to jump out of the machine and kill me. And the explanation of that test was that as it runs through the range, as the frequency increases, the displacement decreases. The reason for that is that the peak velocity remains the same, and so when I'm testing a damper, I've essentially normalized that, and so what I'm looking at is the actual frequency response to the damper, which is the purpose of that test. But of course, it's apparently also useful for a spring. And after looking at this, it's pretty obvious that if I tried to jerk a spring around at 38 hertz with the full displacement of plus or minus 1.5 inches, it probably would have killed me and everyone in the neighborhood. Anyway, let me get to the point. What we have here in black is the displacement, and just as I described, as the frequency increases, the displacement decreases. And let's get to what's important. By the time we get to the point here where we have the resonant frequency of the spring, which is 38 hertz. The displacement is all the way down to a 32nd of an inch. So peak to peak displacement is a 1/16 of an inch, or approximately 1.5 millimeters. And so based on the spring rate of 167 pounds per inch, if we take a 1/16 of that, the forces we should see there, the difference in the peak forces from the lowest to the highest, if the spring were acting as a pure spring at that point, would only be about 10 pounds. We would hardly see any difference in the force peak to peak. I mean, by the time, if you look here in the middle, where the displacement is, well, I'm not going to click back and forth and bother you with that, but just a quick look shows that the force is, let me change screens or change axes. Let's see, here in the middle at its lowest, the peak to peak is about 75 pounds, and of course that represents a considerably greater amount of travel. Anyway, back to the point that matters. Our oscillation here, or our peak to peak force, should be in the neighborhood of 10 pounds. Now what we find though is that we have a minimum of 22 pounds and a maximum of, let's see what we've got here. Let me try to scroll through this and get back up to the peak. Hang on a moment. Might help if I expand it. A maximum of 1,052, so that's about 1,020 pounds. Let's just call it 1,000 pounds to make the math easy. So essentially what we have is a magnification of force. Well, 1,000 by 10, you can do the math. And so think about that for a moment. We have an oscillation here with a peak-to-peak force of 1,000 pounds. Now, granted, we don't drive this vehicle or any other over a surface that's going to provide a perfect periodic 38 hertz input, which is why I took the time to do the step input. But the amplification of force here should be enough to get your attention. And again, like I mentioned in the previous part of the video, the idea here was not necessarily to give you an answer to a specific question, but to show you some of the things that go on and present them in a manner that will give you something to chew on and think about, maybe figure out how it applies to your own. And I may do a video in the future that goes into more detail about this. I shouldn't say more detail, but try to explain better. But as I mentioned, I'm seeing some of this for the first time myself. I'm a little bit baffled, don't have my head wrapped around it yet in terms of how it might affect the vehicle. So there we go, that's it. Something to think about. Everybody survived. I've got a rage headache, but that'll go away pretty soon. And I promise next video I'm going to be so sweet you won't believe it. I won't swear. I don't know what the video is going to be about, but I'm going to film it in a field full of beautiful flowers with puppies and chocolate and hearts floating through the air. It's going to be wonderful. So come see the next one whenever it shows up. Have a good night, everybody.